On behalf of DGN and the Gagglers, I welcome you to this at Google presentation of None on Record. Today our presenter is Selly Thiam. I'll just let her take over. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott, for having me today. Can you guys hear me? Okay, am I still mic'd? Is this better? Testing. Okay, there I am. Okay, so I'm actually going to tell you a little about None on Record. None on Record is an audio-based oral history project, and it started in 2006. And what we do as a team is we travel through diaspora communities in North America and Europe, and also on the continent of Africa to interview LGBT Africans. But before I get into kind of the specifics of how None on Record began and what we actually do, I have to actually play some of the voices of the people that we've met along the way in the last 4 years since we've been collecting oral histories. So this is a brief cross-section of some of the people that we've interviewed.
A lot of us can't go home and be who we are, and we are in exile in some way because of that, and that doesn't make any sense to us as Africans.
I couldn't walk to the shop without hearing at least one person or some car going past and going, beep, beep, is that her? Yeah, bitch, we're gonna get you, you're a woman, faggot.
He said, you know, you can go to the jail for your life. I said, if you bring me in jail for my life, yeah, I accept.
I'm lesbian. I don't care what other people do behind closed doors. It's who they are, and this is who I am. Let's love each other.
And then immediately when we jump on stage and grab that mic, we'll sing the song. Hey, hey, so is a movie. And you know, the whole crowd will just jump and get a standing ovation. And you know what? These people, they know who they are and they know where they stand.
I'm disillusioned because I'm living in South Africa and there's so much that's going wrong. There's so much that has been promised that isn't happening.
If they want me to go back to my country, I will go back to my country. And I will still doing what I started doing before I came here. Because they're still killing gay people, lesbian people, and it's getting worse.
You are nothing without the community. And we're responsible to the ancestors, where we must respond to those. And when I say ancestors, they're not dead. They're alive and they're watching you.
I've had to sort of let go of the fact that maybe I won't be on the family tree, and that's okay.
But I'm African, I'm a lesbian, and I'm an AIDS activist.
So None on Record began as a documentary. I started collecting oral histories partly because I am actually of Senegalese origin. I was born here in the United States. And it began as a documentary, but what it has become is a network of people all over the world who are activists, who are artists, who are organizers, who are none of that, who have gotten caught up in very difficult situations and had to show extreme bravery. But to really sort of give you the background and the context, I have to show you a picture of this woman. This is FannyAnn Eddy. She was a very prominent activist in Sierra Leone. She was murdered in the offices of the Lesbian and Gay Association in Freetown, Sierra Leone in 2004. She was murdered a few months after returning from the UN, where she gave a speech about the rights of queer Africans on the continent, protecting the lives of queer Africans. She was murdered, and the details of her murder are very horrific. Her throat was cut, and she was raped. Her tongue was removed from her mouth. So in 2004, this hit the international news, and an article was written, and it was published in the Chicago LGBT newspaper. So when I saw the picture, this is actually the picture I saw in the paper. This is the first time I was actually seeing a West African lesbian. And the impact of her murder and the symbolism of her murder within an African context had a profound impact on me. And I didn't have any journalism training at the time. I didn't know how to do any audio recording. I didn't know how to, mix audio, but I knew there was something that I wanted to do. And, when you sort of decide that there's something you want to do, I think that, circumstance or the universe creates a way. And so I met this woman, Natisha Massaquoi, who's also from Sierra Leone. She was born in Sierra Leone and she was raised in Toronto, Canada. I went to a conference about violence in third world communities, and she gave a speech about a friend of hers who had been murdered in Sierra Leone in the offices of the LGBT association there, and happened to be FannyAnn Eddy. So when I returned to Chicago, I decided that I would drive to Toronto and I would interview this woman. So she was very gracious and let me into her home in Toronto. And this was the first interview that I took for the None on Record project.
I was very connected with FannyAnn Eddy, who founded the Sierra Leone Lesbian and Gay Association. She did a lot of activist work internationally. She spoke at the UN about rights for queer Africans across the continent. And someone broke into the office of the organization and stabbed her and mutilated her body, which had such an enormous impact and really changed my life. I had to sit down and assess what was I doing here in Canada with all of these privileges and all of these rights. In Canada, we could get married as gay people. We have streets and bars and all kinds of things that we can engage in without worrying about dying. And she was in Sierra Leone doing this work, knowing that she could go to jail just for loving another woman. I felt my silence enabled her to be murdered in that way. All of our silence enabled her to be murdered in that way. She was so out and so public, and she was out there by herself. And if we were all out there to support us, they'd have to kill all of us. You know what I mean? Not just, okay, there's only one we can target, let's get her. It was at that point that I was just really, really driven and committed to doing this work.
Since then, Natisha Massaquoi actually has become our president of our board of directors. But she was the first interview that, None on Record collected. And she was actually the first interview to be broadcast on National Public Radio in 2007. So it was kind of, it's an important story to me as a person who was born in diaspora, because we both felt so disconnected from what was going on the African continent. There wasn't a lot of information coming in at the time about the organizing that was happening there, but there was a lot of organizing happening there. Since then, more information has come to the forefront. But we both, at that moment, after the interview, kind of before it even got put on public radio, knew that something was happening, that we would be part of creating something. And so I came back to the States, shocked myself by having it on public radio. She didn't really know what NPR was because of my youthful, disposition. She thought it was a college radio station. So when her interview was actually broadcast, her uncle called her from Chicago. So, I tried to explain what NPR was, but I should have probably used things like CBC or something like that. But her uncle called her, and he didn't get upset. He just said, you really portrayed the family very well. Like, I was very proud of you to tell these stories. So that was my first interview, and None on Record was born. So then I decided I wanted to find more queer Africans, and I didn't know where any were besides Natisha. So I began to, do Google searches, do different kinds of research, and I came upon this person, Nick Maluko. Nick actually was born in Tanzania and was raised in Kenya. Nick also was born biologically female, and before moving to the United States, transitioned into becoming a male, but was living his life as a male in Kenya. What actually happened was when he moved to the States, the relationship between masculinity for him in Kenya was very different than how he wasn't seen as a man here. So he started to kind of have this reaction that he wanted to be able to feel like he was a man again. He also has a very interesting story because he came to New York to study playwriting at Columbia University. He got an MFA in playwriting, and he also wrote and directed a beautiful play called Why Africa about a Kenyan chief's daughter who falls in love with a white Peace Corps volunteer. And actually, that's how I found Nick. I went to see his play, and then sort of stalked him for a while till he gave me an interview. And he's an extremely private person, so I was very surprised when he invited me into his house in Washington Heights. So let's hear some of that story.
Can you describe how it was to maneuver as a man in Kenya?
There's certain duties that you don't do if you're a man. And certain friends, and you don't really like come up to a woman and you're friends and you hang out together in the village. You go up to a woman for a specific it's for romantic reasons, you know. So it was easy. I understood the zones, I understood the space, I understood how to conduct the space. Trousers I wore always an overvest. So you do what you do. Your hair is short, you rarely talk, whenever you have a conversation, you don't look the other guy in the eye. You sit with your legs up. There's like certain things you need to do. It's easy to perform it there. So there's new tactics, new strategies. And plus I had friends who showed me the way. A lot of them were very, very generous in helping me navigate this. And they used to say, you are my brother. You are my son. You are my best friend who's a guy. And so there's like, this is a mistake. And we're going to help you rectify the mistake. So I came to the States. I didn't come specifically to transition, but butches made it very difficult for me.
And describe that some.
There were, as where I grew up, there were no butches. Mm-hmm. So, if somebody looked like me, they were a boy. Mm-hmm. There was nothing to contrast, nothing to compare with. So that was, so it was kind of easy. So I came to the States and people were like, oh, no, you're butch and and I said, well, no, I'm a man. And I knew, and when I made love with women, I was a man.
So when you do go back to Kenya, how do you think that's going to go?
I don't know.
Do you want to go back one day?
Oh, yeah, sure. I will. I'll go back. It's my home.
So I interviewed Nick in 2007, and he has not gone back to Kenya yet. He has not returned. Partly because he's physically transitioned so much that he is a little bit nervous about how he will be received by his family, which is understandable. He also, in some ways, he tells the story much better than I, but a part of his coming to the States was so he would return, money to his family in the village, and he did actually spend a lot of his money going through his transition. So there's some issues around that as well. But Nick's story of isolation is one that I heard a lot in the diaspora, particularly North America and parts of Europe. And it wasn't really the last time I would hear these stories, because it was sort of a theme that sort of went through all the countries that I've had the opportunity to visit. So when I hear this story, I often ask myself, what it must be like to not be able to return home. And it's something that I don't know personally, but I feel, I feel very much compassion for what Nick has to go through in this area. So I'm actually going to move. We're going to go to a different country. We're going to go to South Africa. In 2008, I believe, we received our first grant, which was amazing to us, that people were giving us money to do this at this point. And it funded our trip to South Africa. Natisha Massaquoi went with me to South Africa. And when we got there, we knew no one in South Africa. We did not know how we were going to do this work. We did not know who we were going to meet. And we were very fortunate to meet a woman named Thokozani Ndaba, who is somewhat of a socialite and who knew everyone. So we met the person who was plugged in, and then she introduced us to everyone that we needed to know. So we met this woman named Beverly Dietze, and at the time I didn't realize how important this interview was going to be. Beverly Dietze, this is a picture from 1990, and she was part of the organizing committee that organized the first Pride March on the African continent in 1990. And it was at sort of the end of apartheid. The country was changing. She is about 19 years old, and South Africa being a multiracial country, she was part of a organizing committee that was, white, was black, was South Asian, people coming from other countries to support the organizing of this march. So she simply said, once she looked at the line of speakers, like there are no Africans, there are no black Africans speaking. So we should probably get some to speak. And they said, yeah, you should do it. So this is kind of what happened after she decided to take that on.
I didn't even get asked to speak at the first Pride March. I think it's one of those things where I asked them why it was that there was no woman of color, girl of color, who's going to be part of the representation. Because if it's only going to be white people up in the podium in the first Pride March in Africa, then what it is white influence nonstop. So I think I just asked. I was like, wouldn't it help us to have a black person? It's like, yeah, yay! What you want to do it? You want to make a speech? So I made a speech. Those cameras around me didn't mean anything until it hit the news. Whoa! Church groups, school groups, parents groups, teachers groups, you name it, everywhere. It was like a whole petition to get me killed, to get people like me. It's like we understand when it's these white people. We understand it's a very white thing to be doing, so we understand. But when you stand up and tell us it's also African, oh, you're starting to insult people's sensibilities and you're shaking their moral ground and you're shaking their own firm beliefs. It was a frightening time. You know, the threat to my family, threat to my mother, the threat to my grandma and my sister, guys coming around my house wanting to teach me I'm a woman, and that was something I did not expect. Like, I couldn't walk to the shop without hearing at least one person or some car going past and going, beep, beep, is that her? Yeah, bitch, we're going to get you. You're a woman, faggot, you know, or whatever. Every time I heard noises outside, I kept thinking, am I being attacked? Because people would threaten. They would say to me, we're coming for you. That actually got my parents completely and totally supporting me. Because the implications were, if they don't support me, then who is? Who's gonna, you know? So my grandma became my rock. That is why when eventually the big group of men surrounded my house and said, we're coming to get her, and they tried to walk through the gate, and she said, walk in, just try it. Just try it. And she called to my great aunt, Kate, bring that thing. She's talking about like a thick iron thing. I mean, if she had a baseball bat, it would be a baseball bat, you know? But they thought there was something else going on, and they kind of stopped. And when the momentum in that group dynamics, when the momentum's gone, you know, and somebody goes, maybe we should leave, they left. So I was escorted for about 2 weeks after the march. My mom would put on her Converse, her Chuck Taylors, and you know, she'd put on her jeans and she'd say, all right, you need to go there, let's walk. I was scared all the time. So yeah, I just pushed so hard and stuck out like a sore thumb and said, all right, look, I'm here and I ain't moving. I ain't budging.
Because of activists like Beth Dietze and Simon and Coley, South Africa eventually passed one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. They allow for gay marriage, protection of rights for LGBT people. But even with a very progressive constitution, the amount of violence that LGBT people face in the townships and across the country is staggering, not to mention just the violence against women in general. I'm not sure if you all have heard of the corrective rapes that happen to a lot of the lesbian women who live in the townships and other parts of the country. But we did meet a lot of women who did tell us these stories of, you know, being put into situations of corrective rapes by people they had grown up and seen most of their lives. So there's still a lot of, and also gay men, trans people also face a lot of the same forms of violence there. So there's a lot of work to be done still, and the organizing in South Africa, it's amazing. I mean, there's so many people who are organizing around LGBT equity there, and so it was an incredible place to be, to see this happening on the African continent. So since then, they've had many gay prides. They started as marches, of course, and have turned into these huge, like, you know, pride events with, you know, beer commercials and half-naked people. And Bev Dietze herself says, you know, she doesn't go anymore because, you know, it's lost its political, you know, message. But she was very instrumental in making that happen. So through this work, I want to say, collecting oral histories for 2 years and traveling to different countries, I started to really ask myself, you know, what does it really mean to go somewhere and collect a story? You know, because usually these interviews are about 2 hours long. And then I cut them down to these, these vignettes that you're listening to. This is from different parts of interviews that I have with people. So it takes a while to produce them. But then I would distribute them, or they would go on public radio, or, someone else would want to distribute them. But I kept thinking to myself that, what does it mean to go somewhere and then just take the stories from that place? I mean, what else can we do to give back? So actually, after coming back from South Africa, and Thokozani Ndaba, who I mentioned earlier, who plugged us into this community, she began to lead our first satellite, which is None on Record in South Africa. So what she does there is she works with a lot of the young women in townships. She collects oral histories from a lot of Africans who have immigrated to South Africa, and she also is learning and teaching a lot of production skills. So I'm going to play an interview that she actually recorded in Cape Town and edit herself. So South Africa actually is our first satellite. Canada became a satellite later. I'm going to play an interview from Canada after this. And soon, later this year, we'll be starting work in Nairobi. So it's become, like I said in the beginning, it was a documentary that has become a network, and is also a way for people, because I had also no formal training, to sort of teach, these like citizen journalism models. Like how do you collect your own history? How do you find ways to tell an alternative story? So with that, I'm going to play Carlos Idibu, who was part of our Seeking Asylum project. He is from the Ivory Coast. He now lives in Montreal. At the time, he lived in Toronto. As we were traveling, we heard a lot of stories of people who had to flee their home countries, and Carlos had a similar situation. So he was part of our Seeking Asylum project, where we specifically focused on people who were looking for refugee status, or were trying to attain refugee status or asylum in the United States. So I'm going to play Carlos's.
We start organizing ourselves in 2003 because we have so many gay people dying from AIDS. Almost every month, some people call me to tell me that, okay, this person died, and that was really too much for me. All the services were directed to the straight community. And when we talk about the work we're doing, they were like, okay, that's not really important because we already have a very big program about HIV. So you guys don't really need a special program for your community. But those people didn't know what were the realities for the gay and lesbian people in Ivory Coast. Many people experience homophobia in hospital, especially for the transvestite people. Anytime they go there, they are targeted with the nurses, with doctors. So they just decide to stop going to hospital. And because I was traveling a lot for some workshop, for some conference across Africa, I wasn't always there to go with them to hospital, and they were very scared to go alone. So the health was getting very bad. And in 2 months, the 5 people who were living with me died from AIDS. In the same time, just because of homophobia, just because they're scared to be rejected by the family, the other members of the organization, they didn't want to come out to speak, to talk at the radio, to talk on the TV, to do some interviews with some newspaper. So I was alone, and that was really, really too much for me. When I finish to work and I go home, sometimes I find some letters under my door saying that, okay, you should move from here because we don't need the gay people to be our neighbor. So in 3 months, I moved like 4 times. And I said, okay, I think it's time for me to move somewhere. I didn't know exactly where to go, but I got 2 scholarships for the Out Games in 2006 and the AIDS conference here in Toronto. And so when I came, I didn't plan to stay in Canada. I don't even know where I am. I don't know what is going on here. But with struggling a lot, doing activism in Africa, I think what I did gave me the strength to stay here in Canada. And what I was thinking about through this process was all the work I did in my country, in the gay community. Who is going to, continue this work? People are dying. And I left a situation like that to come here in Canada. I felt guilty about that. years are passing, but homophobia is still getting high, and they're still killing gay people, lesbian people. In so many countries, the government doesn't care. They even established some laws against gay and lesbian community. They're still doing that, and it's getting worse. So I think there is a lot of work to do in Africa. I'm here, but I'm still thinking about Africa. I'm still thinking about Ivory Coast.
So when we took this interview, he hadn't received his refugee status in Canada, and a few months afterwards, he did receive it. And he actually moved to French-speaking part of Canada so that he could do more organizing in the French community there. He's thriving, but he still feels very much like he wishes that he could go home and do the work there. So I'm going to play one last interview before we wrap up today. This is Victor Mukasa, and Victor describes himself as a gender non-conforming person. Victor was born female as well, and has transitioned into, he uses pronouns him, he, into being male. And Victor is really interesting because he was a very prominent LGBTI rights defender in Uganda. He started several LGBTI organizations there, and was very vocal. And what happened was a young schoolgirl committed suicide after she was abused, sort of physically attacked after a group of students found love letters that she and another young woman were sharing. So Victor got on the radio in Uganda and decided to speak out, which caused huge controversy in the country. People would come outside the radio station and wait for him to attack him. Radio stations got fined for having him speak on the radio. In 2005, the police raided his house and took things from his house, trying to prove that he was a lesbian. And at that point, he decided that he had had enough, and he decided to sue the Ugandan government. And so this is Victor's story.
In 2006, when I moved here, prior to that, I was in hiding in Uganda because around that period, I was suing the government of Uganda for infringing on my rights. After the government agents raided my house, when they came to my house, they just broke into the house, and then if you looked at my house that day, it was like it had been, it had been hit by the tsunami because everything was upside down. And they had taken documents for my organization, CDs, and they claimed to be looking for things that can prove that I am a lesbian. So for me, that was not okay, even if, on the other hand, I was used to being treated that way by the Ugandan government. But being an activist and knowing that we can do activism through so many ways, I felt that I was ready at that point to take another step, and that is sue the government for violating my rights, and also on behalf of others who had been treated like that. Life wasn't very easy for me, so I had to live in hiding and see natural light only once in a while. If I had to being a biological female, sometimes I needed things specific for females, and it was hard for me to send taxi men, like cab drivers for say sanitary towels and that kind of things. So life became so difficult, and I felt that I needed some air to breathe, and I needed to walk on a street once again in my life, since I had been in hiding for a whole year. And so I decided that I leave the country. And so I left in June just for me to stretch a little bit. I decided to stay and wait for the lawyers to call me back. And so that took me a whole year of waiting in Johannesburg.
Did you just win the case now?
Yeah, we just won. About 2 hours ago, I received a call from Uganda, and they were telling me that government has been condemned for the human rights violations against me. I was told that the judge has used, standing human rights instruments to let the government know what rights they have violated. Shows that the judge judged fairly, because in a country like Uganda, if a judge is not strong to stand for the truth, you cannot judge a case in favor of a homosexual or a gender non-conforming person, because who knows what is going to happen to her now after she's made such a judgment. Yes, but the case has been won with celebrations in Uganda. I'm here in Cape Town. I just wish I was there in Uganda, but in my heart, I'm celebrating.
Right. So Thokozani actually flew to Cape Town and took this interview in December of 2008 when Victor had won the case. So it was a huge victory for him and for the LGBTI community in Uganda. He still lives in South Africa. He works for the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission for the East Africa Division, and has been doing work there, and of course has been speaking out about the more recent issues of the anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda, and working with people who are still in the country, although a lot of people have had to leave, still in the country, who are organizing in opposition to that bill. So I'm actually going to stop now, but I do want to say that this was the first interview that Thokozani took for the South Africa satellite, and I really am very happy that we got Victor on record. It was a very good interview, very timely. We are still collecting. We're setting up satellites in different parts of the world, and we probably will be collecting for a long time. We distribute online through our website, which is noneonrecord.com, is our online distribution. And when we do collaborations with organizations, we also distribute through their site. So we support them with their technical needs to distribute through their own site as well. So I'm going to stop now to allow for Q&A. If anybody has any questions about None on Record.
Why don't we take one question and then we can continue questions with the reception?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
for coming. It was really interesting, and I think it's really great work. I'm curious, what's the meaning of the name None on Record?
Yeah, okay. The third interview did was with a priest, Nigerian priest by the name of John, who, when I asked him if he had any names for LGBT people from his ethnic language, which was Yoruba, he said that he had none on record. It was very profound because it was a long silence, and he said, no, I have none on record. And so for a long time, I didn't really know what I was going to name the project as we got more interviews, but that moment was always in my mind when I was thinking about, the level of silence around some of these issues and these identities. And so subsequently, we named the project None on Record after that interview.
Thank you all for coming. And there is wine and cheese in Bakerfield, which is just one of those stores.
Great. Thank you for having me.